Welcome to our Mayor Tim Bowles, particularly, who's agreed to join us for this opening session. Thank you very much. So this meeting is being broadcast on the WECA YouTube meeting. When people are speaking on the Zoom, they will need to disconnect from the YouTube, otherwise we have problems. If I could ask members to leave the video on, but leave the voice mute on as well when you're not actually speaking, please. The chat function in Zoom should not be used except to draw attention to particular matters that directly affect the proceedings of the meeting. So rather than chatting to each other using the chat function, if we can just use it for that, please. So apologies for absence. Ian, have we got any apologies?
Apologies from Carol Johnson, Chair. Councillor Carol Johnson.
Have we got a substitute for Carol or not?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. Can I ask members if they've got any declarations of interest, please? No, thank you. So the next item is the discussion of the COVID recovery plan and climate emergency action plan. Mayor Bowles is here with us. If I could just ask you to do a relatively short introduction, if that's okay, so we can have plenty of time for questions, if that's possible, because I understand you can only be with us for about half an hour.
Stephen, thank you very much. And I was trying to avoid the starting to talk with the mute on, so hopefully we can all hear me. Stephen, thank you very much. Yes, I've got people literally outside my window there. I have to do some filming on the hour, so we'll try to be brief and very happy to pick brains on that. What I was keen to do today was to bring forward both the details about our recovery plan, but also the climate emergency plan. I know when Stephen and I have spoken regularly on this, it's something that's of interest to this committee. And I think the key for me here is really about how those things do join up and are going to be part of our regional ambition as we develop that clean and inclusive recovery programme, looking at good jobs and how we address those challenges that face all of us. So these are really important parts of the future for the region. Also around attracting investment, as we've spoken about jobs, because clearly that's going to be on everybody's mind at the moment. So really this is about setting out how we intend to work towards rebuilding that economy and renewing the way we all work. And the initial approach is to both address the immediate impacts of the crisis, but it's clear through the impact of the crisis and the pandemic, there have been significant impacts across the region on our economy. And that's why we brought together so many people to create the regional task force. Now, what is critical in that is the way that we've engaged with key representatives from all of our business sectors, but also with others from the voluntary and community sectors, academia, and so many more. And I think from memory, the last time I was talking to colleagues, that's something like 180 people have been involved in the consultation with this. Clearly, this is about the region, and I respect and understand that different councils are looking at their own plans. As always, as WECA, we are looking at that overarching piece because, as we know, economies go across our council boundaries. So really important that we have got that evidence base from industry and from all of those other partners providing that information that we feed into government, both around national recovery planning, but also about how we're working together across the region. So what's come out of that work has been 5 key pillars, and happy to explore and go into those more detail with you. I hope you've received a lot of detailed information, Stephen, around this, so I'll try not to go into too much depth. But the real keys that came out from everybody, and I think they're really important, is about how we help rebuild our businesses to make sure that we can try to work to help keep businesses surviving and thriving in the future and creating those new good jobs. Also about how we get residents back to work. So It's really important in terms of security employment and what I call those good, sustainable jobs, well-paid jobs that we work very closely with people around developing through our various teams in the combined authority. We are all passionate, both as WECA, as the councils, but also about our businesses, about trying to strengthen and use this as the opportunity to strengthen inclusion. And that's something that's very key in this, and it's something that plays out for every council. This isn't exclusive to any of us. This is something we're all really keen on. The green recovery aspect is vital. We've heard lots from central government about new green industrial revolutions. It's vital that we are playing our part in that, in terms of transitioning not just the region, but the country to zero carbon and reducing carbon emissions. And I think we have a huge potential to play both nationally but globally in that space. But also then about looking at how we identify the challenges as we change how we live and work, around how we support high streets, how we address how we are going to change inevitably, I think, post-COVID, in different ways we do travel, in different ways we do work. I'm sure, and I haven't looked at all of your photos, but I'm sure most of you are probably working from home today, for instance. It's how we address that. So the significant work has been taking place from the WECA right from the start here, long before we even came to developing the task force. We've done lots of things already around skills, around business support, all of those things that are vital. We've seen huge investment from the government to support businesses as well. So there's lots happening. We're moving forward. We've developed a really good Trading Better Online program. We've developed financial resilience programs, business innovation funds. Our Workforce for the Future program is going to be vital for our SMEs in terms of developing those talents and making sure everybody has the opportunity. We've talked about government bits around small business grants and so on, huge importance there. And our really other key, and I'm really proud of this, is the Thrive at Work piece for the West of England, because I know, talking to businesses and individuals, how many people have actually raised challenges and concerns about actually how they feel their well-being in this new world that we're living in. So vital for us to be working and making that available. But more key from the strategic perspective, we've got a rapid redundancy response team now in place that works multi-agency with government across how we look as coming together for rapid responses around large redundancies, developing a talent retention platform so that we can try to work to make sure we keep that talent here in the region. But I've touched a little bit about skills. It's vital that we're supporting both young people and people who need to retrain in the skills place. So we've lobbied heavily in government for additional adult education budget, and we're constantly, as mayors, lobbying for more devolutions of skills funding. And we've seen lots already happen in that space: digital skills investment program, expansion of low carbon challenge fund, small business resilience grant programs, community recovery plans, high street funds, and lots more. Just a few I've managed to list out quickly. Next step quickly, Stephen, in this is to look at the initial approach. We've brought this together with all of these stakeholders to come up with this very robust evidence-led recovery plan. Task force will continue to work together as we evolve and develop these pieces, because it's vital that business and stakeholders understand not just what we're doing, but they're feeding in on a regular basis. And what we're also trying to do now, and it's similar conversations with government in the last couple of days with different ministers, we need to be looking very much at present, medium and longer term. That's a key part of what we're going to do with the task force, to look at that longer term planning, looking at how we develop that financial investment that we're going to need, but also how we review and build into our local industrial strategy. We as a region will recover. We will come out of this positively. We have a great opportunity here through this plan to look at how we reset our economy, but I hope we can all be positive, because we all need to come together to promote the region, both locally, nationally and internationally, and do those things that we've always done successfully. So that's a little bit about the recovery plan, Stephen. Very happy to walk through the climate emergency action plan, if you like, as straight away, because as I say, I see these very much as co-joined. So if you like, I'll speed through that.
Yeah, relatively quickly, Tim, if that's possible.
Of course. Now, I believe you've seen all the paperwork on this and hope you've had a chance to look at that. So this is about how we've come together. Vari, you're shaking your head. I can only see you shaking your head.
Yeah, we were hoping to see it, but unfortunately it wasn't circulated to us before this meeting as promised. Just a bit of feedback to you.
Thank you. I'm working on the, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'll take that up with colleagues afterwards, but the plan really is co-produced. It's worked along officers from every authority, and it's been building both on the work you're doing individually. I think the real challenge for us here, and really the thing we need to be focused on, our role at the combined authority will never be able to be own and manage everything. This is something in which we've all got to work on. I'm still very proud to be involved in my parish, and we were talking about this on Monday with residents. The residents themselves have got a vital role, businesses have got a vital role to play. Individual authorities have, we have, but so have government, both nationally and internationally. So this isn't going to be a single action plan that will resolve all of those challenges. This is how we're going to be working in bringing things together and creating that plan that people can recognize, if you like, who owns which aspect of it. Some of our roles in here will be direct, others will be lobbying. It'll be about how we work together, both regionally, nationally, and internationally in this space as well. And I do work on that almost on a daily basis. But again, as with the recovery plan, Stephen, this is not the only thing that's happened. There has been lots of work already going on in this place. And it's vital, I think, that all of us recognize that. So we've had huge amounts of work and investment already in innovation. We are globally renowned for innovation in so many sectors. I'm really proud of the work I see that we do as a region in innovation in this space. That will help us both locally, but also nationally and internationally. So it's a way in which we can make a marker on what the West of England can do in this space. So that's why we've been investing in DETI, the Digital Engineering Technology and Innovation Centre, and so many others. Transport is clearly going to be key in this as well. That's why we've invested heavily already in cycling and walking and other things. And I think it's really important that people recognise that actually within our transport plans at the moment, we've got approximately 133 million allocated to regional transport initiatives. 123 million of that investment is allocated to sustainable transport. So please, I think it's important we all come together to recognise that work that we're doing in those spaces and have been for a long time. And those are going to be key to parts of what we're doing. So our Metro West, our cycling and walking, our investment in Metro Bus are all parts of the way in which we're looking to reduce the reliance on using the car. And e-scooters are really going to be a little piece of that as well. And we've had a lot of press about that. So we're looking at so many different areas in that.
Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your time is very precious with us. Would you mind if we went on to questions? Would that be okay?
Of course, but all I would like to just really reinforce in that piece, Stephen, is that whilst this is a plan that really comes together and brings pieces, it's vital that people recognise how much work has been going on, not just from us, but from all the authorities in this space. And that's really the context I want us to see this piece in. But of course, yeah, I'll happily talk forever on all those great things. So yeah, over to you.
Okay.
Sorry, could I just come in just for a very quick moment? Just to clarify, the version of the Climate Emergency Action Plan in the papers, which were circulated last week, is the latest version. So although it wasn't sent to you individually, it is the version that's included in the agenda pack.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Hugh, you're not visible, so if you want to speak, you'll have to shout up. I suggest we have a couple of questions. Thank you. We'll have a couple of questions that we'll go through. So Vari.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Tim, for joining us today. I hope this will become a much more regular occurrence in our future meetings, because it's great to hear directly from you. So my question relates to some of the stuff you were saying about transport. So Andy Burnham and Chris Boardman recently cycled into the centre of Manchester to declare 85 million spend on 140 odd crossings, 55 protected cycle routes to be delivered in 2021. By contrast, we have committed only 14.1 million to active travel specifically, which is less than we're spending on buses, less than we're spending rail, and crucially less than we're spending on road building. Given that this is the case, how does spending less on active travel compared to other modes sit with our climate change action plan, so the thing that we're looking at today? And is there a plan to review this in light of both the leadership that's happening in other combined authorities, but also in response to our plans? Do you have an intention to appoint our own active travel commissioner to look at this? Because I think the value that Chris Boardman certainly brought to Manchester is definitely been appreciated. And it's great to hear that you were talking about, your own parish. And in Winterbourne, I know there's been a lot of campaigning around the dams and bridge, for example, and ensuring that active travel is improved there. So I think there's multiple layers where there's actually possibilities for investing more in this space. So it'd be great to hear from you on that.
Could you just hold that thought, Tim, for a second? We'll just have a couple more questions. Okay, so I've got one, and then I come to Gary. So my question is really, this is an action plan, and I applaud it. It's very reasonable, very clear. What I won't know is how successful we've been, because it hasn't got SMART goals. It talks about, for example, retrofitting homes, but it doesn't say how many. It talks about reducing the number of car trips. It doesn't say how much reduction. So that, I think, is a real flaw in this plan. So yes, Gary, I think you had a question, and then we'll come back to you, Tim, for those three, if that's okay.
Yeah, hard on the heels of where we are now, we're going to get to a position with regard to the European Union. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. How do you envisage changing or not changing the plan to take account of what happens?
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Stephen, thank you. I'll try and work in reverse order, if I may, because it helps me just keep focused on things. Gary, your point about how we work in the new year is vital. So I touched earlier on the work we're doing around the local industrial strategy. We're looking at that constantly. We know where our strengths are. We know where our USPs are in that space. So we will constantly be reviewing the local industrial strategy in light of both what's happening today and in those different terms, medium and long. So that sits very much within that space. I think the other key piece there as well, if I may, and I've got a meeting again tomorrow, is we also, as part of the task force, created another separate group that feeds into that. And in that section, I brought in every employer organisation and all of the banks to be able to get a real deep view, whether it was with members of the CBI, the Institute of Directors, FSB, whether it was people in specific sectors, to understand on a regular basis. And our business and skills team are constantly working with them, as constantly have got those insights. But we're working really collaboratively with businesses to understand what their challenges are, both today and into the new year. The other thing we're doing a great deal on, and I've bet with everybody, all of the ministers in DIT, is around that international trade and focus. We're doing a lot of work with DIT, both in terms of exports, but inward investment, and have had meetings even in the last few weeks, given we're still in lockdown, with senior politicians from Germany, and they're very keen to make sure that we're keeping to driving our economic links with Europe. We know from the work that we're doing in our international planning where our key markets are globally. So Gary, confidence I've got for you there is that we have got the evidence and we're working on how those international markets work and developing those relationships. but also working with supply chain and others who understand again what those impacts are. That's very much part of the local industrial strategy that feeds in, as I said a little earlier. Going back to Stephen's point, so what we'll be doing is looking over the next 6 years, I beg your pardon, 6 years or 6 months. Officers will be working to incorporate metrics from different projects into these plans. So I think, it's been really important. This is based on evidence. It's based on how we look at how we assess that evidence so that we bring this forward in that realistic way. Everybody can set targets, but unless you've done that evidence and base rate, you can't actually come up with things that are going to be realistic for us all to work with. And please remember what I said at the start, very much around how this works at all of those different levels, internationally, nationally, with business, with residents, with councils. So we have to make sure we've worked carefully across those points. So that'll be how we monitor these things to make sure that the targets and objectives and goals are realistic. Going back to Vari, well, we are investing hugely in cycling and walking. As you know, the initial money that we saw from government, we immediately put another 10+ million into that. Other regions, and please, I understand what you're picking out one region. I talk to the metro mayors on a weekly basis. I know what each of them are doing in that space. So the champions that we have here are everybody in our councils. So I know that this is not a view that most other regions share in terms of having I was going to choose carefully my description of Mr. Borden, but the point is about the action. So we are investing hugely in this. And bear in mind that active travel is not just about what you're putting in terms of cycling and walking. It's about how we get people to leave cars at home. I have to confess, your dams and bridges analogy is probably not a reasonable one, because if you know Damson's Bridge, as I do, you can't put separate cycling and walking into something which is effectively a single track. So I'm very aware of that uber local piece, but we have developed the LC WIP. We've got a broader cycling and walking policy, and we are investing in those spaces, and we're constantly reviewing that. So we are making a huge commitment into this, but bear in mind, we have to find active ways for people to leave cars at home, bearing in mind not everybody could cycle or walk. So it's got to be about that collective package, about improving public transport, both options and access, and encouraging people to cycle and walk. And we did a huge campaign recently around doing that in this region. So I think we are investing heavily in cycling and walking, and we are championing that as WECA. Thanks,
Brian.
Stephen.
Brian.
Thank you, Tim. You'll be pleased to hear that I'm actually following your advice, and I've doubled or tripled the amount of walking I'm doing these days. But it's the cycling that is causing me a slight problem. When I'm walking, the numbers of times that I've been approached at speed from behind on pavements by cyclists who don't seem to have bells fitted these days is actually quite frightening and puts you off a great deal. Can you, when you're talking to cycling groups, start asking them to use a bell occasionally when they are approaching people from behind? It really is something that a lot of people are complaining to me about as well. Thanks. That's all it was.
Thanks. Other questions? We'll take a few if we can. Yes, Winston.
Yes, thank you. Two quick questions. Tim, from where you're sitting and what's going well, and where, if it were, what is accessible from central government, what would be your number one priority if you could get more money out of Whitehall at the moment? And secondly, what do you hope will come out of the impending white paper on combined authorities for WECA? Is there something positive that you look forward to?
Anybody else, or can I let Tim answer those ones? Okay, Tim, go ahead.
Stephen, thank you. I'll do it actually the different way around very quickly, if I may. In terms of Brian and cyclists, we're already talking locally in Stoke Gifford about how we can help the cycling and walking challenges that we've got in one of your key bridges there. So we are looking local basis with members around things. I'd go back to the work we've done around e-scooters. We are working with the police around e-scooters, and the police are very, very clear that cycling on pavements, let alone the use of e-scooters, is unlawful. So people shouldn't be cycling on pavements. If they're doing that, the police are quite adamant that is unlawful, as it would be with e-scooters. So in your point about asking individual cyclists to use bells and cycle responsibly, I hope all of us here can endorse. It's very important that everybody goes back to that piece about being responsible in whatever we're doing, whether it's a motorist, whether it's a cyclist, whether we're walking. It's asking individuals to be responsible, and we're all members of communities, and I think we should become champions in that space. In terms of Winston's question, the Devo white paper, at the moment we are waiting for confirmation of as and when that's likely to be published. We have put in bids into both the CSR and the white paper around combined authorities. It's very difficult to come up with one thing in which we're keen to find investment, Winston, because clearly we have a huge remit around skills, around housing, or around transport, around jobs, and so much. So always cautious about picking one thing out, because that almost implies we champion things in a different way. I think the key for us is to ensure that we're able to keep showing government that the investments we've been making in this region are paying off, that they see that return on investment. That gives us the ability to talk to government from a positive perspective to showing how combined authorities do return, and that gives you the business case to then go back into there. But ultimately, what we really need the government to do, and we say this cross-party as mayors, is about the long-term devolved funding settlements. If we have that in place, it gives all of us that ability to plan even more strongly in terms of the future of how we provide the investment that we need to get the region moving, to create the jobs, to support the homes, make sure we've got the skills and so on. So for us, the real ask as a collective is long-term funding commitments to combined authorities. Now that might be for skills, that might be for transport, it might be for other things. So won't pick one out, but it's about long-term funding streams, Winston.
Thank you. Other questions? People who haven't spoken? Jeff.
Tim, thank you for coming along. I just want to talk about the business recovery. To me, the whole concept of Weka leading business recovery seems totally logical, because we're supporting the jobs of people who work in all the neighbouring authorities. So it makes absolute sense. Do you feel you've had the support from central government that you need to really make this happen? And do you feel you're getting the support from the constituent local authorities to play their part in a collective delivery of business recovery?
Okay. Stephen, would you like me to pick that up? Or was there
yes, please.
Else I wanted in? Yeah, of course. Jeff, thank you very much. So let's go back to the whole premise of why we have combined authorities. We came together as councils to identify combined authorities were required to do those things that cross the borders around the economy. So you're right in terms of how government sees combined authorities' roles there. So I think the government, and I talk with all of our metro mayors here, so I am saying the same thing that you will see from mayors from other parties, that the government did act quickly in terms of its furlough schemes, in terms of the way it provided discretionary grants through councils, in terms of the way it's provided retail hospitality and other funding, how it's been supporting self-employed. So they've come together and really delivered on that. And from memory, I think it's over £200 million that have gone into businesses and individuals in our region. But to pick your point on from that, That's why we are working with government both around the short term, medium and longer term planning. Longer term planning, those devolved settlements longer term will make the difference for us. In the medium and short term, it's about how we come together. So the short term, I ran off a bit earlier a list of different things that we're launching. All of those projects we're able to launch thanks to government investment to give us the ability to set those projects up. So we're seeing lots of individual funding from different ministries coming into Weka already to deliver those pieces. And then in terms of what we're building on top of that, we are then talking to government about how we secure that additional funding, whether it's around skills, whether it's around homes, transport, and so on. So we're seeing it very much in those tranches. There has been a lot of support from government for us. So I hope that picks that piece up for you.
Thanks. If I could just ask a supplemental, the sort of elephant in the room, or perhaps the elephant in the room next door, is the expansion of the airport, which doesn't get a mention, although I think it's probably considered it's integral to the mass transit system. I mean, the current position, you know, the airport have appealed. The current position is that Weka are supporting the airport's expansion. Is that still the same in the light of this climate emergency action plan?
So let's pick a couple of things up there. You talk about MRT. Well, MRT is vital, whatever happens. We have a regional airport. It will be key to economic growth, jobs, and so on. We know that the connectivity to the airport has to improve. So I think it's important that we continue to back how we find those solutions to do that, to get away from the reliance on the car, to get away from people's need to be thinking that the first thing you do to access the airport is going to be through the car. So it's important that we continue to invest and look at those pieces. And I'd also add on that as well, that is going to have a bearing as well, the way we plan that MRT, to unlocking an awful lot more potential, particularly in South Bristol. But if you think then about our investment into Metro West, giving us hubs into Temple Meads to be able to connect, it will make improvements for everybody in that area. The matter about the planning application, Stephen, is now with the planning inspectorate. It's not something that sits with us in any shape or form. So yes, we back jobs, we back investment. We want to see people having long-term sustainable jobs, and we're backing cleaning up and reducing carbon in transport. But I would actually emphasize that planning appeal doesn't sit with any of us as councils or as Weka.
Well, with respect, we are major stakeholders, but anyway, I'll come on to Gary.
Yeah, with regard to that, we clearly, if we're going to make significant progress on our environmental targets, must invest in the hydrogen economy to be effective. And is there any progress with regard to the hydrogen economy, specifically with regard to aircraft and flights? Because there are prototypes, and really we have industry in this part of the world that is working on that sort of stuff. And that's exactly, surely, the way that we should be getting out of any financial problems and environmental problems at the same time.
Stephen, may I answer that very quickly? But please, you've probably noticed me. I've got colleagues waving at me.
Yeah, I also want Hugh. Actually, perhaps I could ask Hugh. Would you mind asking your question, and then you can do a wrap up? If that's
on
okay.
a similar note, just about sort of strategic transport hubs, I was just wondering about free ports. So within the papers, it says that that WEC is quite in favour of introducing free ports into the region. Business West have spoken out against it, and there's quite a lot of papers showing that it doesn't really benefit the region much. How much weight is going behind free ports at the moment? I was interested to know.
Okay, Stephen, if you'll excuse me, I'll try and pick those two up very, very quickly. So to pick up Gary's point, hydrogen, so for me, it goes back to decarbonising transport in every level. whether that's going to be cycling and walking, e-scooters, etc. We've seen huge investment from the government about reducing carbon emissions for electricity, because I know people who put it to me that electric cars aren't the future. So we've got to look at those alternative fuel sources. I absolutely agree with you. But therefore, I'd suggest to you, please think about that investment we're putting in DETI. And also, one of the other things, because the list was too long to pick out individual projects, is IAPS around, and I wanted to drop an A out of IAPS, Institute for Advanced Automotive Propulsion Systems, because if we take the A out of it, it then feeds into the piece you were talking about, which is key to what we do in the region. We're working closely with Airbus. We've talked to working with Rolls around how they decarbonize flight. So that future of flight piece is vital for us. And I said in my earlier piece, I think that we have an opportunity as a region to actually have a global impact in this space. So by leading that technology, both in terms of aviation, in terms of how other modes of transport on roads decarbonize in lots of different ways, it is vital that we do that. Clearly, hydrogen will come into that mix. I've spoken to hydrogen car suppliers about us potentially becoming a trial area in those spaces. So that is important, and we'll keep working on that. In terms of Hugh's point about free ports, my interest is what happens to the economy. It's about jobs, it's about our future. And what we're talking with the port and others about is doing what we do as this region so well, which is looking at things differently, looking at how we involve technology and innovation into that. So Gary's just touched on aviation. We need to be at the forefront of our aviation sector, as with our others. So we're talking to government about developing a hybrid in which we can use the port as a hub, but think about opportunities in North Somerset, think about opportunities in the North Fringe, opportunities in other areas in which we maximize the impact of having a free port for our region to help deliver good, long, sustainable, well-paid jobs that aren't simply around Avonmouth, but actually benefit everybody across the region. So there is a great opportunity here in that space. That work is ongoing, Stephen.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for this session. I think we've all found it really useful, and as I would echo that we would welcome your regular reappearance, if that's possible, perhaps every 3 months or some time period that we could agree in advance. That would be great. I think we can let you go. Thank you.
I was going to say, please excuse me. I really do have people, as you can gather. These screens, the cameras almost need to be turned around. So thank you all very much indeed. Lovely to see you all. Take care, and thanks for all the work you do in this space. It's much appreciated. Cheerio, everybody.
Thanks. So on the agenda, we've got about another 10 minutes to talk about this subject. Well, do others have points to make or comments to make? Okay. Right. Okay. I need to think about what the mayor has told us. I think he said, my interest is in what happens to the economy, and I think that's a reasonable stance. But I don't personally think it's the whole story. But there it is. Okay, so I suppose what we could do usefully is, for Ian's benefit and for my benefit, what do people want me to say to the WECA meeting on Friday about this plan? Barry, I'm kind of looking at you because you had some strong opinions both the other day and today. What would you like to see me say to the WECA meeting on Friday about this plan?
I think, Stephen, it's really important to reiterate the comments that you made earlier about the fact that this has been called an action plan and yet doesn't have clear, smart goals. It's great that there's obviously clearly identified measures of success, but it's not specific enough for it to really be called an action plan. The action plan subsequently, I think, still needs to be worked up. And I think it's also really important to flag or to understand how this is actually going to feed into and link to some of the other policies, like the industrial strategy, like the refresh of the joint local transport plan, because I don't think that was evident. I mean, obviously, I asked my question around active travel and active travel spend, and what I was hoping to hear was what we heard previously from David Carter around the fact that the transport programme is going to be rethought, is going to be reconsidered against our emerging climate change obligations using the methodology that we've heard from him previously. So I was really disappointed to hear that that wasn't necessarily the case, and it was very much a retrospective on what we're currently doing, not on our ambition. Actually, what is it that we need to do in order to be able to reach what we're stating in that document, which is carbon zero by 2030, 32% of those emissions come from transport. So if we are not doing a radical rethink of our current transport funding allocations, you know, it's great. And I think everyone agrees it's great that we're spending 123 million on sustainable transport. But we also have to recognise that we're spending, I think in Fosbert, it's something like 25 million or 30 million. They've done a fantastic table in their public statement, if anyone wants to check that out, on road building. And we need to understand, you know, where that sits within those climate change obligations. I appreciate that some road building is necessary to enable, say, bus infrastructure, but there has to be that balance, and that has to be very clearly demonstrated and evidenced. And I think that's what's kind of missing from a lot of this narrative, is what the evidence base is to back up some of these assumptions, and how that rational thought process is going through. So I think we can make some very clear points maybe on some of that.
Okay, thank you. Hal?
I think one thing we're experiencing here is that we've had lumps of money come towards us from government through WECA, and the timescale in which you have to respond to that has been so short that it's not been possible to properly engage, and we're I think suffering a little bit because decisions had to be made so quickly, and people are now asking why. And some of these things with livable neighbourhoods, they come with a degree of opposition, so that if you've had to make a sudden decision, is this a relevant thing to raise here or not?
Jeff?
Right. It seems to me, listening to this, that we've got a report that, in general, we're welcoming, and I think we should be saying that. I think, however, and I think we have to put it in perspective as well. This is a report that three authorities and WECA have agreed on. So inevitably, one ends up losing different bits in the process of reaching agreement. But to not have key performance indicators and measures of success and direction of travel is something that I think we could recommend very strongly as a requirement to take this on to the final stage, because otherwise this document can be measured against in some abstract way for years to come, whereas if it's a start point that develops those key smart measures, and then once we've got the smart measures, I think we're then in a position to push much more for a lot more detail in how we're going to deliver those, and those probably come combined, if you like. But it would seem to me that we're better to be emphasising the positives and add our extra requests than it is to be too negative about it. That would be my preference.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jeff. I mean, I suppose the other thing I would add is, I'll come to you, Gary, in a sec. The other thing I would add is, we're now 18 months into this process. WECA declared a climate emergency in, I think, July 2018. Am I right? So we're 18 months down the line, which it feels like an action plan should be an action plan rather than a set of principles that we're aiming for. Yeah.
But Steve, my point I would make is that we've got to recognise this is a coalition of three authorities and WECA, and therefore it's never going to come as easily as it ought to they've all got to agree on the process. So we can be the catalyst for trying to encourage that response.
Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, I'd be anxious that we don't sort of get into a battle between the economic and the environmental goals, which, you know, if we focus on, we've got to stop the airport expansion, we're into that battle then, which is not helpful. I'd be much happier if we actually looked at the way that we can actually use modern technology and developing technology, which we're particularly adept at in this part of the world, to actually solve the two problems at the same time. Get the economic recovery, not by bolstering some of the older jobs, but by investing in new technologies that will help to solve the climate problem and the economic challenge that we're going to have over the next few months. And quite frankly, you know, I'm horrified at the subsidy which effectively goes into current aircraft fuel, but there's no need for it to happen, and we should be able to make progress.
Thank you, Winston.
Yeah, I mean, we've got two things here, the regional COVID-19 response and recovery plan, and then the climate and emergency action plan. So I am very supportive. I think the work that the senior officers have done and we've had presentations on has been impressive. And I like the way that the task force has gone about it, the priorities. So I agree with Jeff, we should be getting that across and being supportive. I also think Vari's comment, particularly on the climate emergency action plan, and your comment is very valuable. We are nationally, we're still at 2050. West of England net carbon neutral is by 2030. We are out on a limb. We're leading in many ways, and that means we need to work back from 2030 to 2021 and have milestones in place and how we're going to achieve that goal. That's what we would do in the private sector. So I think your point, Stephen, earlier on, and Vari's support of that is very well made. We don't need a cunning plan. We need a plan, and we need those milestones of how we get there to achieve what we need to do. So I think I'm supporting what both Jeff has said and yourself and Vari has said. And I think there are two separate things here: the regional COVID-19 response and recovery plan, and then the climate emergency action plan. And there should be slightly different reactions we give to those two elements of the plan.
Yeah, they are slightly uncomfortably lumped together, aren't they? I can see what they're trying to do in doing that, but they are different. Okay, so has anybody got any last comments on this before we move on to the next item? Ian, do you feel you've got enough to construct something from that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, as usual, I'll draft something after the meeting and circulate it to you and to the committee members for your comments before it's passed through to the committee.
Okay, so the next thing is we'll come to, we've got a public statement, I think. Is that right, Ian?
We have. Christina Biggs did indicate she'd try to join us by 11:15, but I don't think she's with us looking at the waiting room. So
there is somebody in the waiting room, though. Russell
yes,
Boyd?
I don't recognise the name, I'm afraid. So it's not someone I'm expecting to be there.
Okay, so do you suggest I move on then? If Christina joins us, I'm happy to put her in somewhere else.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on the waiting room. I'm not familiar with the person who's currently in the waiting room, I'm afraid. So I'm a bit reluctant to let them in if they've not clearly identified.
No, I don't think you should let them in, but I wonder if it's possible for somebody else to find out who they are. Is that possible or not? Perhaps it's not.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. Yeah.
Okay, so minutes of previous meeting. Did anybody have any I don't propose to go through these page by page. Did anybody have any comments on these minutes, or are they a true record of the meeting as far as people are concerned? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, thank you. Items from the public we've talked about. Chair's business. I don't have any business.
Chair, sorry to interrupt you. Christina Biggs is now in the waiting room, so I can let her in to.
Great, thank you.
Read a statement if that's acceptable.
Thank you. Hi, Christina.
I'm just letting her in now. So.
Thanks. Hi, Christina, you there? Christina?
It's just connecting, I think, Chair.
Okay. Can you hear us, Christina?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us. What would you like to say?
Yeah, thank you, councillors, for, I mean, Vara's already picked up on our pie charts and tables. Thanks for that. It's nice to see that we're being listened to. Yeah, just really to reiterate what you've already picked up, yeah, COVID recovery plan, absolutely. But the climate emergency is still going on, and what we've learned is reduction of China emissions straight back up again. You know, there's no guarantee that there'll be a sort of residual effect from COVID-19, which some campaigners have been hoping against hope, if you like. You know, and this is an opportunity. There's been less people using the roads. I think really you should seriously just say to WECA's committee, please can we halt the road building, and please can we fast forward Metro's phase 1, phase 2, let's do the mass transit scheme. I'm hoping TFGB has sent in their mass transit plans at some point. TFGB are the Transport for Greater Bristol Alliance. They're very much our sister, one of our sister organisations. They've drawn up a light rapid transit plan, which would very much fit within the mass transit scheme. And let's just go for it, absolutely. And I think Metro's phase 1 and 2 of themselves will be a significant job creator for the region when we actually start to deliver the stuff. The ridership will mean that people will be able to travel around for jobs. They won't need to be dependent on their cars. It's green infrastructure, green technology. So please, yeah, let's encourage WECA that they've done the right thing in investing a lot in rail. We'd like to see more. Obviously, there's a question you'll see about Culprit Heath and whether we could put that in instead of having 2 bypasses around Culprit Heath and Winterbourne, Frampton Cottrell. It seems ridiculous, you know. Let's try and think 21st century, and there's loads of money in it. Let's get some money down from government to do a proper integrated, sustainable and active transport plan for Bristol.
Thank you very much as ever, Tina. It's great to see you, and your comments are always really helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item, there's nobody else now, is there, Ian, in the public forum?
No, that's the public forum concluded, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, guys.
Thanks. So next item is the review of the papers for Friday's meeting. Ian, I'm not quite sure the best way to do this. Is it to go through the...
I didn't know if you had anything under item 6, Chair, Chair's announcements or business.
Sorry, I did say I haven't got any announcements or business. Does anybody know of anything that I should say in this spot? Because I'm happy to stand by if somebody else wants to. No, okay. So what's the best way, Ian, to deal with the papers for Friday? Is it to go through them?
Well, obviously we've dealt already with the COVID recovery plan and the climate emergency action plan.
Yeah.
Malcolm Coe is with us at the meeting, our Director of Investment and Corporate Services, so he can take you through the remaining reports, which essentially are finance related, if we take them in sequence.
Yeah, I was going to come to Malcolm, but are there any other reports that Malcolm isn't going to be dealing with?
No, the remaining reports are all the financial ones, Chair.
Okay, fine. So Malcolm, if I could ask you to take us gently through those reports, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be as gentle as I possibly can. Okay, so I think the first finance report on the committee agenda is the budget outturn report for the LEP. This one is a fairly straightforward. It's item 12 on the agenda, 12, Chair, for the WECA committee. This one is fairly straightforward. It deals with the 4 authority budgets through the LEP. At this stage, we are forecasting a fairly minor...
Malcolm, sorry. I've got item 12 Oh, yeah, sorry, but it's Invest Bristol and Bath as well, isn't it? Yes, sorry, carry on.
Yes, sorry, Chair. No, we always put obviously we're reporting here to the Joint Committee as well as the WECA Committee. This is a monitoring report which goes to the Joint Committee, which is the actual LEP budget, which includes and incorporates Invest in Bristol and Bath. Okay. So as I say, there's not an awful lot in this report. It does show a slight underspend for both the LEP budgets and also the Invest in Bristol and Bath budgets are also projecting an underspend at this stage. So I don't really intend to go into an awful lot of detail on this report, Chair. It's a fairly straightforward monitoring report and nothing too major to report on this particular one. Are you happy if I move on to the one front door report, Chair?
That's fine, yeah, thank you.
Right, so one front door is obviously this deals with primarily the local growth fund, and members be aware that the clock is ticking in terms of our time limits to spend the local growth fund. It was always a £202 million programme which ran up to March 21. And members be aware that for some time now we've been over programming on local growth fund to ensure that we do spend all of that grant and don't return any money to government. So we've been around £12 million over programmed on the assumption we'll get some successive funding beyond the 2020-21 financial year. Now we have had approval of our Getting Building Fund allocation for the West of England. It is 13.7 million. And what we're recommending in this report, Chair, is that we put the first 12 million of that Getting Building Fund against the over programme of LGF to make sure we can deliver that entire LGF programme. So in fact, we're delivering £202 million of local growth fund schemes and £12 million of the over programme through Getting Building Fund. The remaining 1.7 million of Getting Building Fund is allocated or proposed to be allocated to a scheme in North Somerset, Western General Stores. So as ever, the report does cover the entire programme of local growth fund and it does inform members of where we are in terms of spend and risk regarding deliverability. From my point of view, Chair, I feel we're in a very positive position in terms of our deliverability on local growth fund. And indeed, we have had positive reports back from government in terms of where we are in terms of the current year programme. I'll pause on that one because there's quite a lot in that report, Chair. If there's any question members have.
I've got a couple, but do others have questions on that report? Barry.
My question is just around the Getting Building Fund, because it says in the papers that obviously this needs to be spent by December 2021, which seems quite ambitious for the number of projects on this. I just wondered if we could get an update on these projects and kind of where they're at the moment in terms of being moved forward.
So I think that's a very valid question. I think if they were completely new projects, I would share your concern regarding our ability to deliver in time. But because they already were in the local growth fund programme, and we already had projects which exceeded the 202 million available, in effect, all we're doing is putting this funding at existing projects. So most of these projects are in train at the moment. That said, it is still quite tight. So we are already in the current year, we already budgeted to spend £50 million of local growth fund to complete that scheme by March 21. And now we have to spend another 13.7 million on top of that. The letter we've got from Getting Building Fund does give us a little bit more flexibility. It does suggest that we've got until March 22 to spend the entire 13.7 million. However, also in that letter, it does suggest we should spend half of that 13.7 million by the end of the current financial year. So it's the same time frame as local growth fund. So we will continue to liaise with government. We'll continue to report to committee about where we are with deliverability, but we will be pushing government very strongly in terms of making sure we have got flexibility to deliver the right projects in the right timescale.
Great, thank you.
My question, Malcolm, is looking at the table where you list all the projects, the Metro West Stage 2 development costs seem to sort of ramp down dramatically in 2021 and beyond. Why is that? Should they not be ramping up as phase 2 kicked in?
I think, Chair, if you look at Metro West, it's a cocktail of different funding streams. So what you're looking at in this particular report is about the local growth fund spend on Metro West and Getting Building Fund spend on Metro West, which obviously we're trying to front load on development costs. The overall budget needs to be looked at in its entirety. So including Metro West, clearly we've got an element of investment fund towards it and also economic development fund. So I do apologise, it's a bit piecemeal, but unfortunately that's the way the government funding streams work. So rest assured we're spending and pushing forward on that scheme as quickly as possible. It's just the different funding streams we're using.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had was about Temple Quarter enabling works. This is obviously a large chunk of money. I mean, I was aware there was going to be enabling works, but has this been presented to us in this form previously?
So the enabling works is although it's in the One Front Door report, is because it's actually a EDF, Economic Development Fund scheme. So the actual documentation will be attached to the committee report. So it's not a local growth fund scheme, and it's not getting building funds. So the 32 million is part of Bristol's allocation for Economic Development Fund from the business rates retention. But the documentation is attached to the report in terms of what the scheme is aiming to achieve.
But in terms of the planning process, for example, this hasn't got anywhere near the planning process yet, has it?
No, and I think you'll find, Chair, that it does is the approval subject to various conditions to ensure that it does come back through the committee system again to make sure it does hit those milestones.
Thank you. Okay, Winston.
Sorry, Malcolm, can you just explain what umbrella is? I haven't quite understood the definition of umbrella.
That's a very good question, and I wish I could, Councillor. I'm going to see whether any of my colleagues from WECA can, because I'm not actually close enough to that. It's a South Gloucester-led scheme. David, have you got any comments on this one?
Yeah, so there's two phases, Umbrella 1 and Umbrella 2, and it's about integration of 5G to across the North Fringe in South Gloss and exploiting the uses of that form of digital technology.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry. Other questions? Yes, Hal.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm looking at paragraph 5.2 there, where you talk about, and it looks, I have to say, like a bit of a fiddle, that you've got 12 million that you need to find some money for, and so you're using the Getting Building Fund to do that. Does this mean that sometime in the future there's going to be, if you like, 13.7 million pounds that government will expect us to spend on some new programmes?
First of all, Councillor, I wouldn't consider the way we count as a fiddle. I think that the issue is that we always, the local growth fund was set, as you know, several years ago, and it was always time limited up to March 21. And prior to this current situation, we always assumed they're going to be a successor to local growth fund. There's been lots of conversations regarding shared prosperity funds. So in some respect, we took a calculated risk to actually over-program our local growth fund. If we just stopped and waited for government to announce the 13.7 million, it would be very difficult for us to design, deliver new projects within the time constraints they're placing. So we took a calculated risk to over-program the local growth fund by the 12 million. And lo and behold, the 13.7 million came through from government, and we got the projects in train to be able to deliver against. So I think in some ways how I work with my finance directors in the region, we look at the entire funding streams in the region, and we try and make sure that we optimize everything that comes through to us. So it certainly isn't a fiddle, but we do need to think creatively about how we can mix and match projects between the different funding streams available.
So the end of it was, are they going to be happy with the way you've spent that, or will they say, actually, we're looking for 13.7 million pound and new funds up ahead? We understand why you've done it.
Not at all. So the government has signed off the projects as outlined in this report, it's detailed in this report. In fact, government have actually said if we want to actually swap projects in and out, which we have been able to do with local growth fund, we have to only do that if we get their written permission. So government have actually rubber stamped our plans to spend on these schemes. In reality, if the 13.7 million didn't come forward, we'd have a problem. We'd be 12 million overcommitted on our local growth fund, and we'd have to make decisions to stop certain schemes to fit within a funding envelope. So government recognise we need this money to deliver out the full programme, and they have signed off the deliverability of these schemes.
Okay, very good.
Other questions? Yes, Winston.
So, Malcolm, in the round, whereas unitary authorities are being under a real financial pressure, by and large, the grants and the income streams that we've got coming into WECA are preserved. They haven't been affected by the COVID crisis. I think the only concern I read somewhere is about business rates. Is that a fair overview?
I think that's fair, Councillor. I think the issue we got, the attention we got, is the vast majority of funding we receive into WECA is around capital delivery, whereas obviously the pressure that the unitaries are facing around the region, indeed the country, is very much on revenue pressures in terms of social care, shortfalls of income, impacts of COVID. So our budgets, in terms of our investment funding, primarily the investment funding is around constructing and building growth, including clean and accretive growth across the region. So that hasn't been impacted hugely from the COVID situation. But you are indeed right that actually there is a small element of our revenue budget which does rely on business rates retention, around 1.2 million, which is in the investment fund report. And that is at risk. But compared to our colleagues, most of our funding streams are still relatively solid at the moment. In fact, where we need to be as a region has been pushing government to get more investment into the region so we can put more investment into the areas of priority that we need.
Well, just to follow up, a question I asked Mayor Bowles, I would ask you, what's attainable from central government if we could get more money? And given what we've been successful at, and you and your team have been successful at, and the senior leadership team, would there be a priority for you what would be your primus inter pares to Latinize it?
What would be my priority in terms of what I'd spend the money on, or what would be my priority in terms of what funding to go for?
That is the thing, because there'll be things you want to spend the money on which you can't get access to any greater funds. So it was really trying to combine those two. And based on what we've been, and we have been successful at getting money, is there a particular priority that if you could get more money out of Whitehall that you would prioritise? I suppose that's the basic question.
So I guess my answer would be we need to look at our strategic priorities, don't we? So we have a local industrial strategy, various of things you talked about at the committee this morning around sustainable transport, investment in public transport, walking and cycling. We need to be able to make sure we've got the right funding to deliver our aspirations. At the moment, the investment fund is a big chunk of money, but it won't deliver everything that we have in our strategic plans. And I just think we need to get more projects developed in the stage of being shovel ready to be able to access funding from government and demonstrate they contribute towards strategic direction.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else, you can move on, I think, Malcolm, to the next item.
Okay, so the next item, Chair, is the budget monitoring report for the WECA budgets and mayoral budgets. Members be aware that the mayoral budget is really just the running cost of the mayor's office and annual contribution towards the 4-yearly election costs. That budget is projecting pretty much online, just a small underspend. The WECA revenue budget, as alluded to in one of the questions just now, is relatively healthy revenue-wise. We're projecting an underspend at the end of the year of 565,000. It still relates to good performance in our treasury management. That still remains challenging, as members will know. Interest rates are at an all-time low at the moment, so our ability to generate regular returns is still challenging. But we do have money invested longer term, which is still providing above average returns. So that is the main contribution towards the projected underspend. The other things to note in the report, again, as alluded to in a question just now, the business rates is an issue for us, not to the same extent as our unitary authority colleagues, but 1.2 million of our revenue budget does rely on business rates growth linked to the 100% retention pilot. And as reported as part of our outturn report in 1920, we knew that the target would be challenging this year, and we set a specific reserve as part of the outturn to achieve the income we required for business rates in 2020-21. So the report does recommend that we draw down 403,000 of that business rates reserves to meet the current year's shortfall. And we'll keep that position under regular review over the coming months, and I'm working very closely with my 151 colleagues across the region. Other thing of note in this report is that the payments we are making to bus operators, concessionary fares, community transport providers, etc. We're following government guidance on that, and we're recommending we continue to pay as per budgeted profile to make sure we've got sustainability of that provider base in the region. So I think those are the highlights of this monitoring report, Chair. Again, happy to take questions.
Thanks as ever, Malcolm, for being so clear. Do people either have questions or comments they would like us to put in the report to the meeting on Friday? on any of these items that Malcolm has put forward.
I have got one other, Chair, which is the investment fund report. Do you want me to talk to that one and then take any final questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please do.
So the investment fund report then, so this is one that normally gets the most interest at the main committee. So again, as alluded to through previous conversations, we are constantly keeping the £350 million WECA investment programme under review, both in terms of deliverability, but also in terms of prioritisation based in the current situation and response to COVID. So this report does bring £32.2 million back to the table. So we've looked at the timing around certain projects about can we deliver them by March 23. Members will be aware that the programme of 350 million does cover the period up to March 23. So if I'm looking at every individual project, we've been working through the directors group to bring that headroom back to the table. So 32.2 million is recommended to come back to the table as part of this report. And how we're recommending we're going to spend this is set up a new development infrastructure fund. So members be aware we've already got a land acquisition fund, and in that land acquisition fund, we're looking at enabling housing growth in the region and looking to repay back into that fund. We want to set something similar around being able to cash flow upfront some tricky development sites, which might incorporate housing, but might incorporate more economy and business sort of focused activities. So that's a recommendation for how we reduce the 32.2 million. There are other various recommendations in this report, as they always are. The one, I guess, of most note is the Regional Recovery Task Force. So members be aware, we already had 5 million allocated to the task force prior to this report. And this report recommends a further 4.4 million allocated to that task force. So in effect, we've got 9.4 million for targeted economic recovery, and report details the headings that we'll be looking at spending that 9.4 million on. And again, every unitary authority have had input into that, and as indeed the task force has, to try and determine the priorities to focus the 9.4 million of economic recovery. So I say there's various other things in there in terms of business cases. We've attached all of the very relevant sort of outline business cases and feasibility studies where appropriate. But I think the two main issues are about this 32.2 million infrastructure headroom and the 9.4 million that we are targeting for economic recovery. So if I stop there, Chair, again, happy to take questions.
Yes, Brenda.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the adult education budget and considering how much retraining is going to be necessary given the current situation, do you think that this amount is going to be adequate? And I appreciate it has been increased, but
so I'm going to bring Stephen Bashford into this one. Now, you're probably aware, Councillor, that obviously the adult education budget is allocated to WECA as part of a national formula, and yeah, we were hoping to get more money on our first year of having the EAB budget, and we, as you quite rightly say, we have got more this year. Of course, we could do with more, but in terms of prioritisation, what we would spend it on, Stephen's probably best placed to answer that one.
Thanks, Malcolm. I think you covered it really well, but just to add, there's been a little bit more that's come through in the last few months from government for sector-based work academies and high-level qualifications, but it's fairly small in the context of the fund. We are constantly pushing for increased adult education, as the other combined authorities are, because it's going to be fundamental to deliver the foundational skills that are needed for recovery. We are making that case loud and strong. We did free spending review, but also off the back of the Prime Minister's announcements in the last week around increased support for level 3 technical qualifications. Our view is that that should be aligned with our education budget in the region. So we're making that point, but you're right, it's not where we want it to be, but I think we're committing it in the best way we possibly can, given those parameters at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I think it's going to be really essential, this particular one, for moving forward. Thank you.
I had a question, Malcolm. So this 20-25 million that may go into, or is it you're talking about going into this development infrastructure fund? Are you able to give me some examples of the kind of projects that might pay for? I mean, I know what the word infrastructure means, but what does it mean in this context?
So I'll go first, but I will bring David Carter in, who will be able to answer it far more eloquent than I. So I think although we've been hugely successful, Chair, in terms of pulling together this £350 million programme, one of the things that I'm very passionate about as a finance chap is very little revolves back into the fund. So I think we're very keen to think more longer term around future investments in the region. So how can we actually pump prime stuff using WECA funding up front, which then might return more money further down the line, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the line, either in terms of developer contributions or uplifting land value. How can we use our fund to mobilise things, but ultimately then create more sustainable? But in terms of the sort of projects, there's a couple mentioned in the report. I think Hengrove is one, for example, from Bristol. But David, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, so thanks, Malcolm. Yeah, so the intention is that where we've got particularly public sector land, maybe that land that's been acquired through the Land Acquisition Fund, that we have a means to both put grant in, but mostly, as Malcolm said, to cash flow the upfront infrastructure delivery of sites that have got, effectively, they've got political acceptability because they've been through the planning process. And as I say, mostly they'll be public sector owned sites, so that we can have some degree of certainty that the housing will be delivered. And also, as Malcolm was saying, that by putting in public sector funding up front, we're likely to get a much better development deal in terms of 106 and planning gain at the back end, because we're effectively de-risking the sites for the developers. So that's broadly the intention of how it works. It's pretty similar to what other combined authorities have already done. But as Malcolm said, it kind of makes use of money that we have available within headroom to invest it and then get it back, so it recirculates round rather like a normal bank would operate.
I'll come to you in a second, Hal, if that's okay. But just so when you say cash flow, you mean this is money that you would imagine would be repaid by developers as they build out sites, for example?
Through a combination, Councillor Clark, of development agreements whereby the public sector are finding a development partner and the development partner agrees to develop out at a certain value per house. Clearly, depending on what the market is at the time, you may get more or less back than you originally invest. But it's only on sites that you've got an extant planning permission and broadly that clearly you've got political support for that site to go ahead. So that's the intention. It's broadly aimed at the UAs who own the majority of the land that would go through the process. And it's also, as Malcolm said, to complement our other investments where we're making direct investments through the UAs in land.
Thanks. Hal?
I just wanted to ask where you find out more about the Land Acquisition Fund. Would I find that on the web, or should I be writing to someone?
We can certainly send to you the conditions and the terms that were agreed when we set the LAF up in 2019, I think, Malcolm.
Yeah, that's right, David. So we did include the criteria as an appendix of one of the previous investment fund reports when we set the Land Acquisition Fund up. It was, I think, around July 2019. So we could certainly draw back and send that out to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Does anybody have any particular view on comments we should be making on Friday? I think we certainly applaud the work that David and Malcolm have been doing. Are there any other comments that we feel we want to make? Okay. Thank you very much, Malcolm and David. Thank you both. So, Ian, what else have we got? Sorry, I'm flipping between screens here. What else have we got? Is that
the last item is just the latest update of the forward plan, Chair, which essentially is there for information. So,
okay. Does anybody have any comments on the forward plan update? I didn't. Okay. Anybody else got anything to say before I end this meeting? Brilliant. We're early. That's good. Okay, so Ian will do a first draft of a report, which I'll look at. I'll circulate to this group, and please come back with any comments. And then I'll give that report to the WECA committee on Friday. Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you very much to the officers, both those in the background and those who spoke. It's very helpful to have people here who have the answers. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you all very much. Cheers, bye.
Thank you, Stephen.